The ADB has just released its outlook for this year and beyond. Let's take a closer look at its key messages now with their Assistant Chief Economist, Joseph Zveglich. Joseph, thanks very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
How important is it for China to let this currency revalue?
Well, we've been calling for more flexible exchange rates in the region for some time. But you have to keep in mind that any change in the value of the yuan is only going to be one aspect of the structural problems that underlie the global imbalances. More importantly, for China, the revaluation of the yuan would help to keep inflationary pressures down, would also help to start that balancing process between domestic demand and exports.
Right, so, what is your feeling and when do you think this will happen?
Well, already there seems to be quite a bit of discussion in terms of allowing for some flexibility. I think it's likely to happen as part of a broader discussion, though. For example, within the region, there's quite a lot of pressure on other currencies as well to revalue vis-a-vis the dollar. But those discussions need to happen together so that you don't have this fear that they will become uncompetitive.
Right. How much, you've got your growth forecast here for Asia, but how much of it does factor in flexibility of the currency markets, and will that affect this growth of these nations?
Well, for the China growth, we see 9.6% this year, and in part that's already built in some idea that there would be some flexibility. But where we would see, I think, the biggest impact on China would not be so much in terms of growth, because a lot of that is still being driven by the stimulus packages that were in place, so from domestic sources, but more in terms of helping the central bank to keep inflation under control.
Right. What about the rest of Asia here? What are you looking at here? And does this momentum that we've seen in this recovery story carry on? Does it have momentum?
Well, we are seeing, in fact, quite a bit of momentum, at least for 2010. The big question is going to be the challenge in terms of moving from these public sources of growth, these stimulus packages that were put in place, to more sustainable domestic demand, consumption and investment.
That's key for all these countries. And, we've got a Chinese consumer who is consuming, but is it sustainable? That's the point here. You say that there are these stimulus packages in place which are probably artificially changing things, but what about the rest of Asia?
Well, at least with China and the newly industrialized countries, we do see a return back to investment coming forward. Now, to the extent that some of this is also coming from the stimulus packages, these are compatible, but there's still the question of what's going to happen with the major industrial countries in 2011 as to whether we can keep that momentum going.
And what's your view there?
We see a tepid recovery continuing, but with a lot of downside risks. In particular, when we look at the global environment, there are a number of things such as continued weakness in the U.S. housing market. I mean, this current crisis started in this niche of the U.S. mortgage market. So until we see more comfort there, will be some concerns. Continued unemployment seems to be being a drag on the major industrial countries as well.
Joseph, very quickly as well, just some of these other countries. I mean, we've got Thailand making news every day. What sort of position is that country in, and how is its economy suffering from the riots that we've seen and a society which seems riven right now?
Well, this is something that we're monitoring very closely. Our projections for Thailand of 4% this year does, in fact, depend on there being a return to a more normal political environment. So it is something that, while we can't really say at this point what the impact will be on the forecast, it is something we're monitoring very closely.